A string of brutal murders causing fear and panic in two college towns near Detroit a half-century ago.
The mutilated bodies of 6 young women were found dumped on the back roads of Washtenaw County. And now there was one more girl missing. Rob Wolchek joins us now with part 2 of the Michigan murders.
The final victim disappeared in broad daylight, but this time the killer made a mistake. He was seen with the missing girl on the back of his motorcycle.
Undersheriff Harold Owing said that all leads are being checked.
It's July 1969, and panic is in the hot, muggy air.
Does it look to you as though the police are going to catch this killer?
No.
Authorities from 5 police agencies continue to comb the 100 square miles of side roads here between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor today in an effort to find the missing Karen Sue Bieneman.
Another college student has disappeared. There have been 6 young girls before this one, each of their bodies dumped on back roads.
A lot of the girls were beaten about their faces and so on, let alone the stab wounds.
The town collectively went into shock, and nobody wanted to say anything to anybody because it was very obvious by that time that there was a serial killer working this area.
It's Wednesday, July 23rd, 1969. After lunch, EMU freshman Karen Bieneman set off walking from her dorm to a wig shop in downtown Ypsi. But when she arrived at Wigs by Joan on Washington, she was on the back of a motorcycle. Karen told the ladies in the shop she'd accepted a ride from a stranger. Joan Goshi and her assistant got a look at the man on the bike.
Police artists made up a composite of the young motorcyclist who is now being sought. Meanwhile, state police are...
A clerk at the chocolate shop next door got a look as well and said the bike was a triumph. Soon, every cop in Washtenaw County was issued a bolo. Be on the lookout for Bieneman, the bike, and the biker, including a rookie EMU cop named Larry Mathewson. On Thursday, when the bolo was issued, Larry remembered something he saw the day before.
I was on patrol the afternoon of the 23rd of July and turned a corner down by Sill Hall on the campus, and there was John Collins. I didn't even know his name at the time.
But Larry, who was still a senior in college, recognized him.
He knew me, and I knew him, just basically that fraternity rivals and that.
Larry played intramural football against him. He was memorable because he was one hell of an athlete. And on that very Wednesday Karen disappeared, Larry spotted him on a motorcycle flirting with pretty college co-eds. Author Greg Fournier.
There were 7 women that he tried to get on that motorcycle before Bieneman got on it.
Larry, the rookie cop, found out his fraternity foe's name, John Norman Collins. John Norman Collins rented a room on the 2nd floor of this building. Yep, this is where he lived. Right across the street, over there, that's where victim number 2, Joan Shell, lived. Larry Mathewson was onto something, and when he found Collins preparing to put a new license plate on a Triumph motorcycle behind the house, the campus cop got a little nervous.
He was probably 20, 30 pounds heavier than I was, and he lifted weights and I didn't.
Next, Larry went to one of the girls he saw Collins flirting with on the same day Karen went missing.
She asked me, she says, is he in any trouble? And I said, well, not that I'm aware of, but if you had a picture, I probably could
clear him.
Yeah.
The girl did have a picture. He put together a photo lineup and headed to the chocolate shop where the employee had seen Karen and the motorcyclist drive off together.
They said she was in the basement having lunch, so I went down there and talked with her, and I says, would you look at these pictures for me? And she said, sure. And so she looked at them, and I don't know, the 3rd or 4th picture was Collins. And when she saw it, she just dropped her sandwich in her lap and said, oh, that's him.
Karen Bieneman was just a missing girl at that point, but that would change the next day. So here's Riverside. You want me to go up Riverside?
Yes. Yeah. And when the doctor and his wife came up to get the mail at the end of the street, his wife, just kind of looked down and said, there's a body down there.
Karen Sue Bieneman was apparently tortured before her death. It appears that her death by strangulation was a merciful relief from a brutal, sadistic bludgeoning.
Karen was found at this location off Riverside Drive, her underwear inserted into her private area, as was one of the killer's signatures. But in her panties, something unusual, more than 500 short-clipped blonde hairs.
Then we found out about the short-clipped hairs in the panties.
Larry Mathewson was brought in to share what he had on this Collins kid with the big boys. Cops from the Michigan State Police, Washtenaw County Sheriffs, and other police agencies that had set up a task force at this old seminary. Besides being the last person seen with Karen and living directly across the street from victim Joan Schell, there was more to link John Collins to the murders. The first victim, Mary Flesher, was last seen being cut off by a shiny car just 2 blocks from Collins' room. That car matched one registered to his mother. And it would seem unlikely he didn't know Mary Flesher.
Mary worked at the university. She worked across the hall from where Collins had a student job.
Then there was the youngest murder victim.
This is Dawn Bason's house here.
Yes, it is.
And didn't Collins have friends in this apartment complex?
He had several fraternity brothers who rented an apartment there.
And,
apartments with a clear view of Dawn's house. Then there's Alice Calum, who disappeared after a party in Ann Arbor.
The source that I have said he saw Alice on the back of Collins's motorcycle driving away.
But the evidence that would seal John Collins' fate came from this house, the home of State Trooper David Light.
Do you expect to bring charges?
Sheriff Doug Harvey.
That was tough on Light. I mean, to come home and to go down to his basement and say, whoa, something's different here.
When Corporal Like returned home from a family trip, he noticed things in his basement were amiss. Before the vacation, his wife had given his kids haircuts and swept the hair clippings into neat piles. Now there was hair all over the basement floor, and there was blood. Like's nephew watched the house the week before, the same week Karen Beineman was murdered. His nephew, John Norman Collins.
The Like children, the 3 boys, were all just white, blonde little guys.
Yeah.
And that hair, color-wise, the first original look at it seemed to be a fit.
A fit to the tiny hairs in Karen's underwear. John Norman Collins was arrested on July 31st, 1969. So who is this guy? He sure doesn't look like a killer. I'll tell you about him after the break. Police made an arrest. John Collins looked like the all-American boy. Maybe that's why Karen Beineman got onto his motorcycle.
How's your client bearing up under all of this?
Well, because he was visibly shaken today, I think you've noticed, but generally speaking, he's been quite composed in view of the circumstance.
John Collins grew up in this house in Centerline, north of Detroit. 50 years later, the house is still there. So is the Catholic high school where John Collins was a sports hero, a letterman. His mother told John and his siblings their father had abandoned them. She worked as a waitress. Now a senior at Eastern Michigan University, studying to be a teacher, he was polite and handsome. But his boy next door image was a farce, something his frat brothers learned the hard way.
He was thrown out because of theft.
In fact, the motorcycle he picked up Karen Beineman on was cobbled together with stolen parts.
Our daughter is gone. She won't come back. But we've tried.
And if police in Michigan had any doubts Collins was their man, they soon learned wherever Collins turned up, girls turned up dead.
I knew we had a good case, but I knew it was going to be a lengthy trial. Boy, and here California's got a better case than us, and they got the death penalty.
Right after the murder of Alice Calum in June of '69, Collins and a friend took a road trip to Salinas, California. During the few days he was there, 17-year-old Roxy Phillips disappeared.
Roxy is walking down the street, mailed a letter a block away from her house, and the letter was mailed, so they knew she got that far.
No.
And that John picked her up, and he had a nice car that was his mother's car.
With Michigan plates, right? That
with
was
Michigan plates.
2 witnesses saw Roxy in the car. Collins quickly left the Golden State, but before he did, he was treated by a doctor for a case of poison oak. Roxy's nude body was found days later strangled. Her body was dumped in a patch of poison oak.
I believe that they traveled out there in a small trailer house towed by Collins' Oldsmobile.
After his arrest for murder in Michigan, the car he took to California was impounded.
They took the car apart and they found under one of the seats a swatch of fabric about the size, I think it was about the size of a dime. And it was the same pattern, the floral pattern, the same weave of dress. Everything matched the belt and that swatch, which connected the two.
Collins claimed he never killed anyone. He even agreed to take a polygraph test. Sheriff Harvey says before the test, John met in private with his attorney.
He was in with John for about 45 minutes. He come out and he says, take him back to jail. You mean the polygraph sitting over here? Take him back to jail. Didn't take a scientist to figure out what transpired. I know for a fact that John confessed to him.
Full attention now swings to the first-degree murder trial of John Norman Collins.
Collins was tried for the murder of Karen Sue Beineman in 1970. His mother attended the trial every day.
Her and the daughter both had miniskirts on and with the boots all the way up, and long dangly earrings, but they were striking. I mean, they stood out.
In the courtroom, John Norman Collins sat more relaxed than he's ever sat in the courtroom before. He smiled often at his attorneys, at his mother, and at the relatives present.
But the hair evidence in Karen's underwear matching the clippings in his uncle's house where he killed Beineman was overwhelming. On August 19, 1970, a jury found John Norman Collins guilty. He was sentenced to life without parole.
Would you classify Collins as a criminal sexual psychopath?
Oh yes, without question, without question.
In part 3 of this series, I'll show you the effect these murders still have on people 50 years later.
LaForge still scares me.
And you'll meet women who had close calls with the killer 50 years ago.
As soon as I said no, his whole demeanor changed.
And someone who says John Norman Collins is still luring women into his clutches to this day from his prison cell. Yes, John Collins is still alive in a maximum security unit in Marquette Prison. And apparently, he still has his charm. I'll explain in the final chapter of my series on Fox 2 News at 10 tonight.